Thank you, Elisa, for having invited me. Thank you, everybody, for participating to this seminar. So about my research, I became interested in studying innovation when I was a master's student. Actually, I was doing my exchange period in Denmark, and I attended a course in the innovation field. I did my thesis, my master thesis, which was a policy evaluation of R&D subsidies to private firms. And since then, I started to be interested more and more in evaluating the impact of these subsidies and tax credits even to firms. But since then, basically, I started to study innovation more broadly and entrepreneurship, which is partly related to innovation. And I decided to stay at the university to become a scientist, a scholar, because I became passionate about research. And the paper I'm going to present today is also a paper focused on innovation, where innovation is our outcome variable, as you see, it is a quantitative research related to the topic of cartels, and in particular, breaking up of cartels and self-reporting. I will explain in a minute what this self-reporting in the title means, but let me quickly introduce you the team of researchers. I'm not working on myself on this research, but with other colleagues. Pierpaolo Parrotta is also in the audience and is professor at Siena University. Valerio Sterzi is also in the field of innovation, is an innovation scholar, so maybe some of you is familiar with his work. He mainly works on patent data and patent data analysis, and he works at Bordeaux University. Giacomo Valletta is a colleague from École Business School in France, and Annabelle Joachim is a former student from Maastricht University, where I was doing my postdoc at some point in my career. Pierpaolo and Giacomo were professors there, and Annabelle was doing her thesis with Pierpaolo. She decided not to pursue her academic career, although she was interested in research, and she's now a consultant in the field of antitrust. And we are working with her on this paper and also on other papers. So this is the outline of the presentation, so a standard one. And let me start with the introduction. Typically, when I present a paper, I start with the motivation. But in this case, let me delay the motivation a bit of a couple of slides, because I would like to explain to you what that self-reporting in the title means. Self-reporting is a feature of the leniency policy. The leniency policy is a tool that competition authorities use nowadays to fight cartels, to detect them and to try to break them up. Here in this slide, you see a quote from Mario Monti when he was president of the European Commission, which is the competition authority in Europe. Monti claimed that fighting cartels is one of the most important areas of activity of any competition authority, and a clear priority of the Commission. Cartels are cancers on the open market economy, which forms the very basis of our community. The leniency policy is one of these policy instruments used to ensure that the market operate according to, let's say, healthy competitive rules, which are considered the very basis, is considered the very basis for economic growth to happen and innovation to prosper. The leniency policy has been introduced in the late 70s in the US for the first time. Since then, several other countries, including European countries, have used this policy. And in particular, the very core of leniency policy is the possibility to obtain an exemption, partial or total exemption from the fines that the competition authority would impose to firms that belong to a cartel. A cartel is a secret agreement among firms that is illegal because firms coordinate on their strategies. It could be their pricing strategies, it could be their exporting strategies, they decide to share the market, or it could be a combination of all these strategies. And this is not healthy for the economy because, of course, imagine if firms decide to keep the price of their products high, consumers have to pay, and therefore there is a deadweight loss of their wealth. Which are the features of this policy? It's a policy that can be implemented when the Commission has started already the investigation or before the investigation starts. It doesn't apply to a specific industry, but to the entire market, any industry. And it's codified, it's transparent and codified, meaning that once there is one of the cartelists, a cartel member that decides to self-report relevant information to the authority, the leniency policy is applied automatically. Of course, fees, as I will explain a bit later, are calculated according to certain characteristics of the firm that decides to collaborate with the authority and on the relevance of the information that are provided to the authority. Which is the objective of the leniency policy is, of course, to detect cartels, so to try to increase, let's say, detection, and also to try to increase deterrence. So to try to induce a lower number of firms in the very first place to decide to collude. In this slide, you see just a few examples of the 10 highest cartel fines per case until 2021, so very recently. And you see this is, the year, the case name, and the cartel members, and the amount that that specific cartel was, the amount associated in terms of fines. And you could see that we are talking about a lot of money. And for example, the first one was, here we can also infer the kind of industry in which the cartel occurred, the kind of market. In trucks, we have MAN, Volvo, Renault, Daimler, Iveco. Forex is about, it was a cartel in which the trading strategies of these banks basically were coordinated in order to determine the increase or decrease of the price of certain assets. For example, in the TV case, there was a price agreement on the introduction of the flat screen TVs. So you see, these are all products that do affect our life because we consume these products. And in fact, I can imagine that many of us are familiar with these companies, although as consumers, we may not be aware of these collusive agreements and the impact that they have on, for example, the price that we pay. In terms of the products that we buy. So just to ask you a question, how many of these cases do you think that could benefit from the leniency policy? In how many of these 10 cases the leniency policy was applied? Just guess. I mean, it's not based on unless you know it already. It's 10%, 30%, 50%.
Everyone could be affected to a certain point. Maybe not everyone is affected for 100%, but at least at some point they all are.
You mean all cartel members or all cases?
All cases.
Yes.
Probably not each and every one of them, but like the cases in general.
Yeah,
could be affected.
That's correct. In the 100% of cases, in each one of these cases, basically there's been at least one of these firms that you see that has decided to self-report key information to the authority. And in this slide, the following one, you see just to be more precise, which has been the lien recipient, so the firm that has decided to report information and therefore to obtain an exemption or a total immunity from the payment of the fee, and the undertaking, which is the major competitor in the collusive agreement that had to pay instead the fee. You have a question?
Yeah, when talking about the FW group, there's now some news that this leader of the FW group is going to report on himself, basically. Will it have another impact on the entire cartel fine thing? The leader of the VW group, I think it was last week that he said that he's going to report on himself as being the main leader of the scandal.
But this is not, you're referring to the emission scandal.
Well, it's the case name is car emissions, so.
It's not the same.
But it's not the same scandal.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's, but I agree with you. But in this case, the antitrust case was a case in which the authority discovered that these companies, automakers, had coordinated on the introduction of some technologies that were reducing emissions, basically. And that's why it's related to car emissions. But the Volkswagen scandal is then another scandal which involves also Volkswagen. If you want to talk about this, we have another research ongoing papers, so we can talk offline.
Before you said that they could use this leniency policy before or inside of the investigation. How many, like, when's the case really came just before, like before the investigation started, and they were like?
We can retrieve this information from the data we have, but we don't use this precise information from given the analysis that we are going to do. But we can talk about this later on.
So, like, the lenient recipient is the one that makes the litigation, like makes the problem to be seen somehow.
If the investigation has not started yet. If the investigation has started, there's been a reform at some point, and I will talk about this also later on. But it could be that the investigation has already started, and the leniency recipient decides to report this relevant information to the authority. Probably we ask ourselves as a research team, is this a strategic behavior of these firms because they know that the other cartelists are going to be affected in terms of the payment of the fine? And if I am a cartelist and I decide to report this information to the authority, it means that I will be exempted. So it's an advantage in terms of money that I should be paying, but I'm not going to pay, and my direct competitors are going to pay. So basically, our interest in all these cases is related to the fact that we would like to understand what happens to the innovation activities of these firms, to the leniency recipient, to the non-leniency recipients that belong to the cartel. What about the other firms that were exposed to the cartel in the same industry, but were not, in fact, collusive firms? So, in general, before going to the core of our contribution to the literature, let me just say that analyzing the effectiveness of the leniency policy is, from a theoretical point of view and purely economic point of view, quite straightforward. Because what do you do when you try to understand if a policy is effective or not, is a given intervention is effective or not? You look at the benefits, and you compare the benefits with the costs, right? So in this case, which are the benefits of the leniency policy? The fact that you discover the cartels and you collect some money in terms of the costs. The costs are associated with the administrative costs of doing the investigation. And of course, the fact that if there is a leniency recipient, that recipient is not going to pay the fine. Right, so it's the investigation that you carry on as an authority, but you don't benefit for the full amount of fines that you would have in absence of leniency. We can observe, empirically speaking, the cartels detected when a leniency policy is introduced, and we can try to understand if there is an increase or not of detection. But what about deterrence? That is a first, let's say, limitation of analyzing this kind of policies for any researcher. It's very difficult because we only are aware of agreements that we discover, but we are unaware by definition of agreements which are kept secret and are not discovered. From a theoretical point of view, the theory in industrial organization solves this problem by saying, okay, there is an optimal level amount of leniency policy that you should implement in the market. And if you do more of this policy, it's going to be counter-effective. From an empirical point of view, it's not so straightforward for the reason that I just mentioned. what is the motivation of this paper? So I go to the core now. If we read the declarations and the reports of the competition authorities in Europe, in the US, they, of course, mention that the main objective of this policy is cartel detection and deterrence. But they also mention that through the recovery of competition in the market, when cartels are removed, the economic growth can be favored and innovation can be favored. They declare, for example, in the first bullet point here, you see a quote, one of the best ways to support innovation is by promoting competition. This is a quote from the European Commission. But when we saw these declarations, we asked ourselves as researchers, okay, we know that there is a relationship between innovation and competition that has been studied a lot. This relationship is not linear. It's not true that the more competition you have, the more innovation is going to happen and to arise in the market, because it has been found that the relation is non-linear. In particular, it has an inverted U-shaped relationship. If you want, we can talk offline about this. So it's a bit more complicated. So what about this leniency policy, which is supposed to restore competition and therefore to affect innovation? But do we have positive or negative or null effects on innovation outcomes? In general, we could also ask ourselves, and this is something that we do ask ourselves, what about firm outcomes in general? Because one of our objectives in this, with this research group is to also look at other outcome variables. What happens to firms' productivity, to sales, and other, strategic behaviors of firms. So this is our research question, and the hypothesis that we test is this. Okay, if there is no effect, we shouldn't find any relationship between the leniency policy and this self-reporting activity, the breakup of cartels when self-reporting is present, and innovation outcomes. But we do find effects. And in particular, we do find a positive effect. So it means that somehow this self-reporting means that the authority has more, let's say, valuable information to restore competition in the market. This information is used to favor also innovation, because probably the Commission in Europe, because we are in the European context, is more effective, knows better the market, because there is an informant, an insider that is interrogated by the authority, and the authority knows much more, given that there is self-reporting, compared with the case in which there is a breakup of cartel, but there is not self-reporting. And what we find is interesting, because we find that this increase in number of patents, which is the proxy for innovation in our context, mainly comes from firms that do not belong to the cartel. So restoring the competition as a positive outcome on firms that were somehow exposed to the cartel because other competitors were secretly agreeing on some strategies. Once these secret agreements are broken, the outsiders of the cartels benefit because they become more innovative, they produce more patents, and also in terms of firms that enter the market as innovative firms for the first time, basically those firms that start patenting, we also do find a positive effect. So very, very quickly on the literature background. There is no paper, to the best of our knowledge, that is doing precisely this at the moment, because the literature studying the effectiveness of the leniency policy is mostly focused on what I call the direct effect. So, which is the effect of the policy on cartel outcomes. Duration, detection, what I mentioned earlier. Of course, depending on the type of research question that is asked, the type of empirical, of the econometric models in the empirical analysis that are used are different, because here you study duration, you have to use duration models. If you want to count the numbers of cartels that are detected, you use count models. These are the two papers that we could say are the seminal papers in this literature. Miller predicts from a theoretical point of view that when you introduce the leniency policy in a market, you will have an increase in detection right after, because self-reporting means that, what I said earlier, the Commission has more information and it becomes easier to detect cartels. But when the leniency policy stabilizes in the market, so not right after the introduction, but over time, there is a decrease of the detection rate because this is the hypothesis from a theoretical point of view, less cartels are formed. So it increases deterrence. So since there are less cartels, of course, there is less detection. Instead, when we look at duration, this paper, the second paper in the slide, predicts that when the leniency policy is introduced in the market, weaker cartels break more easily because of the self-reporting mechanisms. When it stabilizes instead, so over the long run, only the strongest cartels are kept alive and are active in the market, and therefore the average duration in the long term does not decrease, but only, let's say, the short run duration decreases. These theoretical predictions are tested empirically, and in this field, results are mixed. So there are some papers that find support for these theories and other papers that do not support them. Of course, these are research papers that are conducted in a different contexts, different countries, etc.
Something?
Yes.
Maybe I missed that when you explained before. So how does it practically occur that the leniency policy is implemented? So the company itself denounces, or there's any sort of investigation or an invitation by the commission?
No, it's the company that decides to self-denounce the cartel, the authority. And it could be, this could happen when the investigation has started. So the company is probably, we can imagine, aware that this investigation is going on.
But the fact that there is an investigation is the public knowledge, or is it insider information?
No, it's insider information. But it could also be that a cartelist decides to self-report the cartel and the investigation has not started.
Okay, but then wouldn't all the firms within the same cartel self-report? Why is one reporting and the other not?
No, in fact, it will be probably clearer when I present the reform of the policy. But just to anticipate that a bit, there is an order, and if you are the first one, of course, there is an interrogation, an investigation on this particular firm, and any other firm that comes after should add relevant information that provide value added to the authority. So it could be that
it is counted on the fine.
Exactly. It could be that more than one company within the same cartel reports, but it is the authority that decides when, for example, the investigation with the first one, that is the first reporting firm is over, and then if there is a skew, the second one can come in and the commission decides when this is over, the interrogation with that one, and so on and so forth. But at some point it stops. So there is a time limit, and not all the cartelists can become.
So there is a window, there is a time window which you can self-report.
Yeah.
After the first submission of a report.
Yeah.
And the second, third, fourth, etc. They do have a reduction of the fine proportional to when they self-report, or
no, it's more. It's actually related more to the content of the information that is relevant. Of course, if you are the first one, it's more likely that you report a lot. Probably it's also your intention. So the second one that reports, the fine depends on the value that of the information that is self-reported.
Yeah.
First come, first served.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So these couple of papers are the papers from a methodological point of view that are closest to our paper, because we also use a difference approach, and I will explain that more carefully in the next slides. The first paper is a paper by 3 of my co-authors, including Pierpaolo, and is also a paper that is associated with that literature that I mentioned earlier, so looks at the cartel outcomes. And they analyze, however, the reform. So not the introduction of the policy, so before and after. Before there was not the policy, and then there is the policy, what happens? But here they analyze the change in the policy. And they do find an effect which is positive on the duration, so a shorter duration, but not a shorter investigation or a lower fine. Instead, this paper is a paper that is somehow related to ours, but is not very similar, and I'll explain you why. CAN 2023 uses this, the breakup of cartels as exogenous shocks in the market, so something that could not be predicted in advance by firms. And these shocks are considered as proxies of changes in the intensity of competition in the market. So when there is a breakup of a cartel, the competition increases. This is the hypothesis. And he wants to understand what happens to innovation. But he compares industries in which there were cartels with industries where there were no cartels. And he doesn't talk about leniency policy. So it's related to ours methodologically, it's related because it's also on innovation, but it's not related because there is no leniency policy, no, there is no reform, etc. What he finds is interesting because he finds that apparently collusion in his setting, which is the US, benefits innovation. Because when there is the breakup of a cartel, cartelists face a reduction in terms of innovation outcomes. They patent less, they patent in less technological fields, and they also invest less in R&D. And the hypothesis, yes.
Yeah, so any type of collusion activity, I mean, or collusion that has to do somewhat to innovation, IPR, etc. I mean, when
no, it's any
even for prices or
yeah, exactly.
That was kind of my question. So collusion means collusion with the cartel and not collusion with the leniency.
No, with the other firms.
So the firms, when they collude, they increase their.
When they collude, they increase the R&D investments and the patents, because the hypothesis is that they need some market power to, as an incentive, let's say, so to be innovative. And collusion is, an unlawful and criminal channel through which this could happen. Because there are also other scholars, starting from Schumpeter, who have claimed that, okay, competition is good, but, why do firms innovate? They do innovate because they want to reach, let's say, a rent position, at least for a while, and patents provide this temporary rent by law. So that would be the mechanism.
No, just if this author also studied what happened with the outsiders of the cartels within this.
Any firms, many counterfactuals are used, but it's not focused exclusively on the outsiders, which is the focus of our paper.
Yeah.
So exactly. So we do something that is related, and we like this paper because it's something that we are also studying. But our contribution is a bit different because we look at breakup of cartels. We compare self-reporting cases without breakup, without self-reporting. Instead, he compares industries where there is no cartel at all. So it's a different setting. So this is the reform that I mentioned. I said that in Europe, the policy was introduced in 2002, right? The 2002 version was, let's say, a weaker version compared to, the 96 version, with the 2002 version that basically represents the policy change that we also exploit in this paper. Because in this case, these are basically the elements that the Commission uses to evaluate the exemption to give to the firm that is self-reporting. For example, total immunity for the first firm that engaged into this self-reporting activity. It was not given in the previous version in 96 up until 2002. So there was basically uncertainty regarding the exemption, because even if I was the first to self-report, it could be that I had to pay a fine, but I didn't know how much because it was discretionary for the authority to decide. It's, you pay 80%, 75%, 50% of the fine. It depended on the case. The the self-reporting firm could not get the immunity if the investigation had already started. Instead, this changed in 2002. Now it is possible. It was not possible to obtain it if the company was the ringleader. Who is the ringleader? Is the major partner in the collusive agreement that, plays the role of keeping the network active in terms of collusion. Now it's possible in the 2002 version. So the only element basically that was present in the two versions was this fine reduction, which depends on the value added in terms of additional information that the Commission didn't know before you provided it, and now it knows. The queuing system that I mentioned earlier and the time window were instead part of a second reform introduced later on in 2006, but you understand that the major policy change is the 2002 one. And in fact, this has been used also in other papers for, other purposes as an exogenous variation, and we refer to that literature, and we also use it in our paper. So we get to what we do practically with data. So this is the difference model. The outcome variable is the ln, so the logarithm of patent applications at EPO. These patent applications are not just, the count of patents, but are quality adjusted, meaning that for each patent, we look at forward citations, because you have to imagine that the more a patent is cited when it's published, the more it's cited by other patents in the future, the more it's valuable to other firms, right? Because the content of that patent is used as the knowledge base for other scientists that want to enhance that knowledge, right? So we look at 5 years ahead, maximum this time window, and we weight our measure in terms of quality. And this is the standard in the literature, is done in many papers. The alternative measure is to look at the number of firms that innovate for the first time. So we want to see also if there is an impact on that dimension. Then we have a dummy for self-reporting, a dummy for the year in which there was the breakup of the cartel, and the interaction between these two terms. This interaction is our variable of interest, because we want to compare cartels broken because there was self-reporting, and cartels broken because there was no self-reporting. And then we have a set of control variables that we have retrieved from the cases that we analyzed. These are public documents, actually. If you want to access them, you can. And we have these variables, so we know the type of cartel, as I mentioned earlier, if it was a price agreement or another type of agreement, and we have different dimensions. We know the number of markets, so the geographical scope of the cartel, if it was active only in one country or in more than one country. And mostly these are European markets because we are in the European Union. We know the industry. At this point of the paper, of the empirical analysis, we have the 3-digit industry, but we are working on the 4-digit version because we want to run a robustness check on that. Mitigating and aggravating factors relates to the role of the firm within the cartel. If it was the firm had a minor role, was a peripheral in the network, was a peripheral firm, it's a mitigating factor. On the contrary, a ringleader is an aggravating factor. And limit of 10% of the firm's turnover. So those amounts that you saw in the previous couple of slides can correspond maximum at the 10% of the turnover. This is by law, let's say, the limit. And of course, we have a second version of the model in which basically we take the same model, but we interact the previous interaction with the reform. And of course, we have to add to the model the other variables that contain the 2002 leniency policy reform. So the data, come from a merge, two sources, which are the same dataset used by my co-authors in their recent publication in the International Journal of Industrial Organization, in which they looked at cartel outcomes. And basically, this data has been built by reading, as I was telling you earlier, by reading the cases published by the Commission and collecting all this data, these variables that I mentioned to you. And of course, there it's where we found the self-reporting variable, the key variable of our analysis. And then this data has been merged with the PATSTAT data combined with the OECD data at firm level in order to identify the names of collusive firms and the names of non-collusive firms and the outcome variables in terms of patents. So we know the patents of the entire industry, the patents of collusive firms, the patents of non-collusive firms, and also the number of total number of innovating firms and total number of new innovating firms. So those firms that innovate for the first time. Yes, that's it, I think. So these are a short description. This is a short description of the data. So you can see that cartel detected compared with cartels self-reported. What do you observe? How would you comment this figure based on what I just said regarding the reform?
After 2002, the self-reporting
increases. And so the hypothesis and what has been also found in other empirical research is that by introducing this new version of the policy, detection has increased because there's been more sort of self-reporting. And there are years, in fact, in which we only have self-reported cases and not cases detected by the authorities. Then in the past, for example, here in 1997, no self-reporting and just detection by the authority. Here instead you see the duration.
Sorry, can I have,
Yeah.
if you go back, I mean, so those cases that are cartels detected prior to 2002 are cases where you have the cartels detected and then on the same cartel you have the self-report.
No. You have detected by the Commission and no self-reporting activity by any of the members.
Okay.
And cartels in which there was
between the two.
No. In cases in which at least one member decided to self-report. Okay. That's the difference.
So then you have more cases before 2002 on average, right? If they are not overlapping, you have more cases. You know why?
Yeah. The theoretical prediction is that with the introduction of the leniency, there should be more deterrence, more deterrence. So you discover less.
So you should have less cartels.
Because there is more incentive not to form a cartel in the first place. Okay. Of course, deterrence cannot be observed. And also the existing cartels that remain on the market should be the hardest to break. So it could be that there are cartels, but the Commission has not found them. Yeah. And nobody has self-reported.
Yeah, so that's the interpretation would be deterrent.
An interpretation will be deterrence and only the strongest survive also. Here instead we see duration. What do you see here? Shorter after the introduction of the policy. And even more dots, I would say, compared to earlier. So here you have the industry composition instead. And you see that the 40% of cases are in the first industry, which is chemicals, fertilizers, plastic and synthetic rubber. And that is interesting, actually. All cases that we have in this analysis belong to some manufacturing industries. But this doesn't mean that in service there are no collusion, there is no collusion activity. It just means that innovation is more difficult to measure by using patents there because it happens in a different way. it's organizational innovation, it's a service innovation that it's hard to patent, and therefore we don't capture that, but it exists, of course. So this is, let's say, a limitation of our research and any research that uses patents to proxy innovation. So that one is the most representative industry, but also manufacture of electronic motors, generators and transformers, and other general purpose machinery.
Mainly, do you remember if the cartel type is price, arranging price, or?
No, I don't remember by heart, but we do control for that. In the, of course, in the empirical analysis, we have a control. You want to say something?
The majority of the cartels is price.
Yes.
It's price fixed.
Yes, but it's not the only.
No, because we have some that are focused on trading strategies, and others that are a mixture of different dimensions. So you fix the price, but you also coordinate on strategies, or you share the market. So
there are multiple infringements.
There are multiple infringements. Exactly. So quickly, descriptive statistics. So these are the outcome variables. I don't mention them again because you know them now. And we compare basically the mean before cartel breakup and after cartel breakup. Here we are in the case of industries in which self-reporting occurred. If we compare these mean values, we see that already from a descriptive point of view, we have an increase of these values after the cartel breakup. And here, when we focus, we do the same exercise, but on non-self-reporting industries. Where in industry where cartels did not occur through self-reporting, we have the reverse sign. Basically, we have less innovation outcomes. Of course, this is not a causal finding. It's not evidence of a causal relationship, and we need to run our model to find something more causal. And these are the results. So in this table, we have 3 columns in the top panel and 3 columns in the bottom panel. The first column has the logarithm of patent applications in the cartelized industry, so it's the total number of cartels. The second one is the cartels of non-leniency recipients, and the third column.
You're saying cartels instead of patents.
Patents, sorry. And the third column is the patent applications of leniency recipient firms. Okay, those ones that self-reported are in the third column. And what we are interested in, we said, is this interaction term. And we see that there is an increase of a number of patent applications in the entire industry. And we do not find a significant effect for the other 2. So when there is either leniency or non-leniency recipients, we don't find at this stage of the analysis any evidence. But what is interesting is that that 0.24 is mostly driven basically by this coefficient, because it's almost the same in terms of magnitude, the sign is the same, and also the significance level. And this corresponds to the ln of patent applications of non-collusive firms. So it means, in our interpretation, that self-reporting provided information to the authority that could restore competition, and this competition was acted in favor of firms that were not cartelists, but were whose innovation was, let's say, limited by the presence of the cartel, because the competition was not working properly. And we do find also an effect on the number of new firms, of firms that patent for the first time. Okay, this is the first part of our empirical analysis.
So again, self-reported for the non-collusive firms in that particular case means, so if they're not collusive, then they're not self-reporting themselves. So
No, it's not
self-report of others in the industry.
Yeah, okay, exactly. Then we said, okay, but of course, these are all firms involved in some type of patenting activity. But what happens if we remove the industries in which there is less patenting activity. So we took basically the distribution of patents, and then we said, okay, let's focus on the second and third tertile. So we split them in 3 equal parts, and we exclude the first tertile because there we observe less innovation activity, basically. What happens? We do find a stronger effect because we had 0.24, now we have 0.34, and basically a confirmation of previous results. The main result is mostly driven by non-collusive firms exposed to the cartel in the same industry. And now we also find a positive effect on the total number of firms that are patenting in the industry, and not only the new ones that are patenting in the industry. What happened after the introduction of the policy change? Something similar, but also a bit different, meaning that with the introduction of the new, let's say, elements that we saw earlier, now also these coefficients turns out to be positive and significant. So leniency recipients seems to be more innovative. Of course, this is in, let's say, technical terms, endogenous, because it means that since self-reporting is an activity that the firm decides to engage in, it could be that the leniency recipient wanted to do that because some innovation activity was already planned in the firm. They were already investing in R&D and in the process of getting patents, and they wanted to probably strategically beat cartelists, so their direct rivals, because we anyway find that these other cartelists not involved in the self-reporting activity had to pay the fine because we know it by law, and did not innovate. And in fact, this cannot be interpreted statistically because it has no significance. But it's interesting to see that the sign is negative anyway. And in this case, we could say that this should be less exogenous because those firms are exposed, belong to the cartel, but are exposed to the self-reporting of another firm. They have not done the self-reporting. But again, what is interesting is to see that the non-collusive firms are more innovating anyway. And same happens, a confirmation of our results for the number of firms that engage in patenting activity and number of firms new to the patenting activity. Last but not least, what happens if we take this, let's say we run the same analysis, so on the 2002 reform, but we balance the time window of the years before and after the reform. It's just a robustness check. So we have the same number of years before the 2002 and the same number of years after, because it could be that in the previous versions we said that we have more years after and this affects our results. Let's double check if this is the case. And in practice, nothing changes. So we do find the same results. And as I said earlier, now we are collecting data from the reports in order to build a variable that proxies the 4-digit industry. This is not straightforward because this information should be codified by reading the reports, all of them. Instead, the 3-digit industry has been codified more quickly because it's basically indicated directly on the report. But we are doing this exercise because we want to double check with a finer measure if the results hold, of course. And just to sum up, because this would be the conclusion of the presentation, we find that self-reporting increases the number of patents applications, especially by non-collusive firms, by about 23%. And also the number of firms, new firms, patenting firms in the capitalized industry seem to benefit from this because there is an increase of about 9%. And both effects enlarge if we exclude the first tercile of the pre-sample patent in 2-digit industries, because I forgot to say that we use the pre-sample characteristics in order to define the first tercile. And it is more effective after the reform of the 2002.